Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Laguna Beach's live broadcast. My name is Donna McCartney and I'm honored to be your worship associate today. The title of our service is The Hands of God. We're delighted to have a longtime friend of the fellowship, Reverend James Ford, speaking with us today. This will be his first visit since COVID. James was a UU parish minister for 25 years and is minister emeritus of the First Unitarian Church in Providence, Rhode Island. James is also a Zen teacher and serves as a guiding teacher of the Empty Moon Zen Network. He has written 5 books on spirituality, mostly focused on Zen. It's time to light our chalice. In each heart lives the flame of truth, bringing warmth and light. Bringing warmth and light, hope and inspiration. I need some inspiration here. Lighting our chalice on Sunday mornings is a reminder of that inner flame and the need to nourish it and share it with one another. James will light our chalice this morning. Light yours at home as well, if you would choose to do so. James?
If our lighting is literal, or as in my case, metaphorical, it nonetheless is a symbol of something that we're all invited into in this hour. I love the symbol of Unitarian Universalism of a flame within a container. We can only exist fruitfully, joyfully when we're with others, protecting us, holding us, allowing us to shine forth. In that spirit, we light our chalice.
And now he'll share with us our centering thought.
Today, we're invited into a moment of reflection, the possibilities of the heart, our lives, who we really are. Tonight, today, this morning, we will remember the caution, let not your left hand know what your right doeth. But at the same time, in that not knowing, discover the light of our lives, maybe.
Thank you, James. So we are delighted to have, as usual, our fabulous music director, Carole, singing and playing with us this morning on her piano. We'll be muted while Carole sings and plays hymn number 102, We the Heirs of Many Ages. But you're welcome to sing along from home if you choose. The words are in the chat section. Thank you, Pam, for doing that for us. Carole?
Mm-hmm. Good morning. We the Heirs of Many Ages is a song we're not terribly familiar with. So I'm going to play it through first, just so you can hear the melody, and then we'll sing all 4 verses.
For the prophets so 3 sieges
Thank you, Carole. That was beautiful. So we will now say our Unison Affirmation. Please unmute yourself so we can hear each other as we read together. It may sound a bit disjointed, but it's lovely to hear each other's voices. It takes me back to the times we were together in the fellowship, and it reminds me that at some point we'll be back together again at our building in Laguna Beach, hopefully soon. The affirmation is on the screen. Please read it with me. Love
is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law.
Our great covenant, dwell together
in
peace,
seek the truth
and
and
love,
love,
and to help one another.
I know it was rather disjointing. I know, but it's kind of cool hearing each other's voices. Okay, so Unitarian Universalists are a welcoming congregation with membership open to all. We subscribe to no single religious creed, but rather have gathered a set of principles that guide us as we build a religious community together. Our minister is Reverend Lee Marie Sanchez, who's with us this morning. So it's time now for joys and sorrows. If you are so moved to briefly share with our community a joy or sorrow. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, and a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. This is not a time for announcements, but rather a moment to express something in your heart. If you have something to share, please raise your hand and we will call on you when it's your turn. Please make sure you're unmuted before speaking. Also, this part of our service will not be recorded. So I will go first. I'm going to ask you a question. Can you help us keep our UFOB strong during this pandemic? Remember that the mission of our congregation goes on even though we cannot be together in our building, passing the basket around. So you're seeing the screen that shows you how you can contribute to help us keep our mission for world peace and social justice. Please give generously and with love. The links to both Tithely and PayPal are in the email that was sent to you to let you know about this service. So it's easy to click on the link and to contribute. At this time, James will lead us in a meditation. After the meditation, Carole will sing hymn number 187. It sounds along the ages. The words will be in the chat section like they were for the first song. And so James, meditation, thank you.
Thank you. Somebody once said that if you wanted to understand Zen, there were three things. Everything changes. Everything is connected. Pay attention. All the practices of Zen, whether it be Zazen, seated meditation, koan, introspection, or ritual and liturgy, they're all invitations into presence, something we as Unitarian Universalists also find kind of important, just to notice, just to be present. Perhaps we tie it to our breath so our monkey minds wander a little bit less, simply noticing the breath flowing in and flowing out. But the important thing is notice. Give ourselves just the little gift of presence, just for a moment. Presence, a present, just a few moments.
Hello again. It sounds along the ages. It sounds along the ages, soul and serving to soul. It kindles on the pages of the Bible scroll. The psalmist heard and sang it from what lives in Rome. And from the tongues of praying till sweet nations fall. From swagman's praising and gold, it breathes from Buddha's tree. It charted out its market, its dawn of Galilee. The hammer stroke of Luther, the pilgrim seaside prayer, the universal concord, unholy word declared. It calls a low new justice, it speaks out low new truths. In every noble stature and unexhausted views, forevermore resounding and knowing that of time, our lost redemption music amidst eternal time.
And now James will share with us his message.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to also share this live stream on Facebook with our little Zen group as well. So let me turn that on. And then welcome. I'm so grateful to be here. What a pleasure to be back with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Laguna Beach. I'm James Ford. And let me mark out the fact that this is sacred time, a moment for us to reflect on our deepest truths and what it might be to live in the world. And that lovely you hymn, I just think it's great. And what is the it that it keeps talking about? Today, maybe we'll unpack some of that. A few weeks ago, I received an invitation to review a new edition of a book by Alan Watts. Pretty good for an author who's been dead just shy of 50 years. As I poked through the manuscript, I found myself, not for the first time, considering what an interesting thinker. And something more. Alan Watts almost perfectly captured the spiritual movement that was the 1960s. When I go back and look at his writings, I am sometimes shocked at how often they must have been part of what has come to be how I see the world. What is surprising to me, frankly, is that he continues to be read. I mean, such a perfect example of a moment, and a moment that has passed. But these books, well, they're in print or they're being reprinted pretty much without pause. It doesn't hurt, I'm sure, that a number of his recorded talks have been animated by younger admirers, most notably the team that do South Park, and have been posted all over YouTube. There is that. But really, catchy animation isn't going to be enough. And there are the books. No doubt, if you look narcissist up in the dictionary, Alan Watts' picture is there. Watts is by turn eloquent, witty, opinionated, self-referential, and compelling. What is most important is how he touches the perennial spiritual thirst of our human condition, the it of that hymn. His critique could cut to the bone. For instance, in his book, Behold the Spirit, a study in the necessity of mystical religion, published in 1947, the year before I was born, he writes, "It is all too clear that our age suffers from a vast hunger and impoverishment of the spirit, which the organized Christian religion, as we know it, rarely satisfies. It would be easy to blame the modern world for ignoring Christianity if church religion showed any strong signs of spiritual life. The truth, however, is that with some very few and scattered exceptions, church religion is spiritually dead. And the best minds of the church admit and deplore it openly. This is so obvious that there is no need to stress it, except as a starting point for constructive discussions." End quote. I began to blog 16 years ago. Preparing for this, I looked Watts up and saw I've given him attention 71 times. Some of these are fairly deep dives, and we get the benefit of that here in this reflection. I actually met him a couple of times, speaking of self-referential. To quote from myself again, because I can, in my History of Zen Buddhism Come West, Zen Master Hu, I described the first of these. It was sometime, I believe, in 1969, 4 years before he died. I was on the guest staff of a Zen monastery in Oakland, California, led by Roshi Gyukinnen. I was enormously excited to actually meet the famous man, the great interpreter of the Zen way. Wearing my very best robes. Okay, I only had 2 sets, one for warm weather and one for cool. Anyway, I waited for him to show up and waited and waited. Nearly an hour after the scheduled meeting, Watts arrived, dressed in a kimono, accompanied by a fawning young woman and an equally fawning young man. It was hard not to notice his interest in the young woman, who, as a monk, I was embarrassed to observe, seemed not to be wearing any underwear. I was also awkwardly aware that Watts was intoxicated.
No.
Alan Watts was, in fact, the first person to write popular books about Zen in the West. Beginning in 1937 with The Spirit of Zen, and more importantly in 1957 with his best-selling Way of Zen. It would be the first book about the subject that an entire English-speaking generation would easily be able to access. He drew mainly on the scholarly work of D.T. Suzuki, the first person to write authentically about Zen in European languages. All of it made accessible through Watts' engaging style, enormously readable and genuinely compelling. Well, and with Watts' personal twist on the matter, he took Suzuki's focus less on practice and more on awakening. But, as I summarize in my history, an erstwhile Episcopal priest, engaging raconteur, and scandalous libertine, Alan Watts was also a prolific author whose books created an inviting sense of Zen as pure experience and a do-what-you-want spirituality. These qualities both profoundly misrepresented Zen and led many people to it. On that last note, some years later, I attended a talk by an American Zen priest. At the end, during the question and answer period, someone asked about Watts. The priest sighed. Apparently, he had heard this question before, and then said, I know there's a lot of controversy about Alan Watts and what he really understood about Zen. He paused, and then he added, but you know, without Alan Watts, I wouldn't be here. I have to say, in large part, that's true for me as well. In the 1960s and 70s, Alan Watts opened some important doors for many of us looking for a new way. Over these passing years, I've come to feel the title of his biography, his autobiography, In My Own Way, and maybe even more the title of the English edition of Monica Furlong's biography, Genuine Fake, taken together points to the complexities of this intriguing Anglo-American Zen trickster ancestor of, broadly speaking, our contemporary spiritual scene. In a relentless critique of Alan Watts, Lou Nordstrom and Richard Pilgrim, two religious studies scholars, one, Nordstrom, also a Zen priest, pointed out how an authentic spirituality must encompass, quote, practice, discipline, and effort, end quote, features completely lacking in Alan Watts's Zen. Big emphasis on the scare quotes around the word Zen. In large part, I agree, but not completely. On the spiritual path, there is absolutely a time and a place of a falling away of practice, discipline, and effort. As we open our hearts, we find the way is in fact broad and forgiving. And it seems Watts tasted that freedom and joy. I really believe he did. But the authentic spiritual is also in that delightful conundrum of real life, totally bound up with practice, discipline, and effort. The intimate way is also, without a doubt, harsh and demands everything. And here, Watts seemed completely clueless. Now, in my opinion, Alan Watts was at his very best during a brief period when he tried at practice.
I saw President Trump on Fox about Maria, the money.
Let me start that sentence again. In my opinion, Alan Watts was at his very best during a brief period when he tried practice, discipline, and effort, or at least stood in their general neighborhood. Raised in England, his natal tradition was Anglicanism, although he formally abandoned it by 16 for the eclectic and frequently theosophically tinged Buddhism of the London Buddhist Society. In his late 20s, having come to America and desperate for an occupation that paid something, he decided to become an Episcopal priest. Watts had not attended college, but by providing a very long list of the books he had read and then showing a suspicious faculty he had not only read them, but profoundly absorbed them, Alan Watts was admitted into the divinity program at Seabury Western Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. In 1945, Watts graduated with a master's degree in divinity and was ordained an Episcopal priest. He was then engaged as the Episcopal chaplain at Northwestern University. He was at that time 30 years old. It appears to have been an amazing moment. He was wildly popular on campus, and his quickly produced, endlessly produced, prodigiously produced books were received in progressive religious circles as challenging and compelling. However, within 5 years, Watts was out of the ministry. It all ended for many reasons, but not least of which was how his wife sued for an annulment on grounds of adultery. This part would become something of a pattern for his personal life. For our time here, I want to remain focused within that Christian moment. His divinity degree thesis was reworked and published as the book Behold the Spirit, a study in the necessity of mystical religion. As I mentioned, first released in 1947. I can't tell if it has ever been out of print. What I do know is that you can buy a new copy today. There's even a Kindle version. It's really interesting. An attempt at synthesizing Eastern and Western spirituality grounded in a broad and sympathetic expression of Anglicanism. I've seen the term monistic or non-dual Christianity being used here and there lately. Monistic or non-dual as the reconciliation of the myriad things of this world with an interdependence so complete, one can speak of it all as taken together as one. Monos. Of course, variations on monism are at the heart of much of Eastern religions, certainly of Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism. And worth noting, our Unitarian Universalist seventh principle is often understood exactly in that non-dual way. While one can argue there have been non-dual currents in Christianity, particularly among some, although not all, early Gnostic schools, his perspective has definitely not been a part of normative Christianity. In mainstream Christianity, the world and God are seen as relentlessly separate, creator and created, and with a looming gap between the two, unbridgeable. A world of problems have followed the setting up of a hierarchy with the spirit above and good, and the world below, and at best, problematic. If the proposition that the world is completely separate from the divine were true, well, we would just have to live with it. But, and let me make this a categorical statement rather than my usual hedging. That's not true. Rather, as I open my heart to the world, the great mess that is you and me and all things, I find each thing is created and creating all at the same time. We exist within a dance or a web of intimacy, where each of us is a moment in a shimmering play of reality. And that play of reality is exactly where I find the divine, the holy, the sacred. I don't need to go to some other place to find it, and neither do you. A small word of good news. Me, I see no need at some extra bit. Perhaps why I'm not a mainstream Christian or anywhere nearby. That said, there are today a host of emergent Christians who don't see the separation either. Richard Rohr and Cynthia Bono, I only read her. I never heard her. Those are two contemporary and apparently popular writers that fit the bill. Others I've stumbled across are Bruno Barnhart, who is Bugol's mentor, as well as a variety of Hindu-influenced Christians, like the nun Sarah Grant, the anonymous Cistercian monk who writes under the name A Monk of the West, as well as, well, the list it's long, but such folk as the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart and moderns like Thomas Keating, Bede Griffiths, and Martha Reeves, who writes as Maggie Ross. Pretty good start for those of us who wish to pursue this further and in the spirit of the Unitarian Universalist tradition of salvation by bibliography. Later, you can look this up if you want at my blog. And Alan Watts, that book, Behold the Spirit, kind of spells it all out in a way perhaps even best done by someone not actually immersed in it all. Instead, standing more in the neighborhood of that practice, discipline, and effort than within it. Of course, that distance also means he misses some things. I admit I find Watts a tad too comfortable with his own insight, unchecked by others who have walked the way before, a danger for the spiritually unaffiliated. The book, it was a revelation when he hit the scene publishing on, what now, 70 years ago. It was, I gather, and perfectly obviously criticized for its creeping pantheism. I would say the Alan Watts of that book was in fact a thoroughgoing panentheist, and the book could even be seen as a panentheist creed. Panentheism is probably the most compatible Christian variation on pantheism, another word for non-dual or monistic spirituality. In panentheism, the world is seen as divine, but that the divine, God, cannot be limited to the universe. Even with that accepting at some point an other of some sort, this panentheism is still a major and, to my heart, healthy step away from the normative dualistic vision of the Christian church. And with all this taken together, a question bubbles up. In a meditation he wrote, Watts, a quarter of a century after Behold the Spirit, he asks on behalf of all those who would challenge his thesis, can Christianity abandon the monarchical image of God, a God separate from all that is in a great split between creator and created, and still be Christianity? To which he responds with another question, a rather burning one, as I feel it in my heart. Which is more important, to be Christian or to be at one with God? Or for me, to follow some orthodoxy of separation and cut myself off from what is calling to every molecule of my being, or commit wholeheartedly to the great play of the many as one, found as I open myself to the world as it presents. A worthy challenge, I believe, perhaps the great challenge. And I think Watts, in fact, spells out a fair amount of what an affirmation of non-dual Christianity can look like in his thesis and his book. The sad thing, as I see it, was that he couldn't follow through for himself. His personality, what he liked to characterize as his bohemian personality, just didn't have a fit in the organized church. I'd have to add, his lack of personal boundaries would have meant he would never have made it as a Unitarian Universalist minister either. He was born to be an outsider. And after that 5 years stirring up the Anglican Church, he made sure he would forever be an outsider. And he pointed a way. First, he spells out a reality. The metaphors are straight out of the traditional church, which might be difficult for some of us, and to my ears, even more difficult when he uses relentlessly masculine by preference language. He was writing before that necessary linguistic shift within our culture. But if we allow ourselves to listen, we find the underlying understanding he presents shakes the very foundations of the moral universe the conventional church preaches. He declares, quote, God is the most obvious thing in the world. He is absolutely self-evident, the simplest, clearest, and closest reality of life and consciousness. We are only unaware of him because we are too complicated, for our vision is darkened by the complexities of pride. We seek him beyond the horizon with our noses lifted high in the air, and fail to see that he lies at our very feet. We flatter ourselves in premeditating the long, long journey we are going to take in order to find him, the giddy heights of spiritual progress we are going to scale, and all the time unaware of the truth that God is nearer to us than we are to ourselves. We are like birds flying in quest of the air, of men with lighted candles searching through the darkness for fire. End quote. Watts lays out the traditions of the Christian church as a manifestation of this truth of our radical interdependence, of our bottomless unity. The man who can only stand in the neighborhood of practice, discipline, and effort shows where it can be found. I think in part because he really did taste the deeper truths, really did to some degree, and none of us are judge of how deep any other, or for that matter, even we ourselves have traveled, really did touch the great insight. So The Episcopal priest Martin Smith notes, even as a mirror reflects all colors and shapes without interference, Alan Watts could call us to stand in the place of the wise heart. In the same way, the mystical awareness of God does not contest place with other experiences and states of mind. Mental states such as joy, sorrow, exultation, dejection, pleasure, and pain are as a rule mutually exclusive. But the mystical stage is inclusive, just as God and his love include the whole universe. There is no conflict between experiencing the now and the things which happen in the now. Smith touches the heart of wisdom as Alan Watts presented it. This is an extremely good pointing that even for those with no affinity for the traditional language of the Christian church can nonetheless recognize as an expression of what we all find as we open our hearts as wide as the human heart can be opened. The field is found, and the dance of things within it is revealed. In his little book, and during those 5 years, Alan Watts showed those who love the Christian tradition how they can turn toward the real without abandoning their tradition. Genuine fake. A teacher for those willing to follow the way he pointed to, but could not himself go. A wonder, a joy, and a hint of possibilities for us all. The intimate way. Amen.
Thank you so much for that message, James. We'll finish up like we always do by finishing up with Carole Cole and us singing Let There Be Peace on Earth. Thank you all for joining us today. And remember, we have our virtual cafe afterwards if you'd like to stay. Thank you.
Let there be peace on earth, and heaven begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace understand to be. With the rivers of honor, we are family. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be my running now. With every breath I take, let this be my song.